Hello everyone, welcome back to Daily Devotions with Pastor Peter. We're in Genesis chapter 29 today. Been taking a little bit of a break, been busy, a lot of things happening at the church, and trying to get things done. So hopefully you had a good break yesterday, and regardless of whether or not you heard me, hopefully you heard from the Lord. That's the most important thing. Anyways, in Genesis chapter 29, that's where we'll be today, and this is what Genesis chapter 29 says. Then Jacob hurried on. Finally arriving to the land of the east, he saw a well in the distance. 3 flocks of sheep and goats lay in an open field beside it, waiting to be watered. But a heavy stone covered the mouth of the well. It was the custom there to wait for all the flocks to arrive before removing the stone and watering the animals. Afterward, the stone would be placed back over the mouth of the well. Jacob went over to the shepherd and asked, "Where are you from, my friends?" "We are from Haran," they answered. "Do you know a man named Laban, the grandson of Nahor?" he asked. "Yes, we do," they replied. "Is he doing well?" Jacob asked. "Yes, he's very well. He's well," they answered. "Look, here comes his daughter Rachel with a flock now." Jacob said, "Look, it's still broad daylight, too early to round up the animals. Why don't you water the sheep and goats so that they could get back out to the pasture?" "We can't water the animals until all the flock have arrived," they replied. Then the shepherds moved the stone from the mouth of the well, and we water all the sheep and goats. Jacob was still talking with them when Rachel arrived with her father's flock, for she was a shepherd. And because Rachel was his cousin, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and because the sheep and goats belonged to his uncle Laban, Jacob went over to the well and moved the stone from the mouth and watered his uncle's flock. Then Jacob kissed Rachel, and he wept aloud. He explained to Rachel that he was her cousin on her father's side, the son of her aunt Rebekah. So Rachel quickly ran and told her father Laban. As soon as Laban heard that his nephew Jacob had arrived, he ran out to meet him. He embraced him, kissed him, and brought him home. When Jacob had told him his story, Laban exclaimed, "You really are my own flesh and blood." Jacob then marries Leah and Rachel. After Jacob had stayed with Laban for about a month, Laban said to him, "You shouldn't work for me without pay, just because we are relatives. Tell me how much your wages should be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The older daughter was named Leah. The younger was Rachel. There was no sparkle in Leah's eyes, but Rachel had a beautiful figure and a lovely face. Since Jacob was in love with Rachel, he told her father, "I'll work for you 7 years if you give me Rachel, your younger daughter, as my wife." "Agreed," Laban replied. "I'd rather give her to you than anyone else. Stay and work with me." So Jacob worked 7 years to pay for Rachel, but his love for her was so strong that it seemed to him but a few days. Finally, the time came for him to marry her. I have fulfilled my agreement," Jacob said to Laban. "Now give me my wife so I can sleep with her." So Laban invited everyone in the neighborhood and prepared a wedding feast. But that night, when it was dark, Laban took Leah to Jacob, and he slept with her. Laban had given Leah a servant, Zilpah, to be her maid. But when Jacob woke up in the morning, it was Leah. "What have you done to me?" Jacob raged at Laban. "I worked 7 years for Rachel. Why have you tricked me?" "It's not our custom to marry off a younger daughter ahead of the firstborn," Laban replied. "But wait until the bridal week is over, then we'll give you Rachel too, provided you promise to work another 7 years for me." So Jacob agreed to work 7 more years. A week after Jacob had married Leah, Laban gave him Rachel too. Laban gave Rachel a servant, Bilhah, to be her maid. So Jacob slept with Rachel too, and he loved her much more than Leah. He then stayed and worked for Laban the additional 7 years. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he enabled her to have children, but Rachel could not conceive. So Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "The Lord has noticed my misery, and now my husband will love me." She soon became pregnant again and gave birth to another son. She named him Simeon, for she said, "The Lord has heard that I was unloved and given me another son." Then she became pregnant a 3rd time and gave birth to another son. He was named Levi. She said, "Surely this time my husband will feel affection for me, since I have given him 3 sons. Once again, Leah became pregnant and gave birth to another son. She named him Judah, for she said, "Now I will praise the Lord," and then she stopped having children. Interesting story. Once a crook, I guess what goes around comes around, and that's what comes around. Jacob got tricked. He worked for Laban, was willing to work for 7 years to get his love of his life. Interesting what he said here. She was pretty, and she had a pretty face and a good figure. It was a little shallow as we see here, but then we see here too that he comes to family and he's able to talk to them and connect with them at a good time. But just because they're family, if they're not God fearing, as you could see here, anything goes. So, as we see here, he was able to marry someone that was familiar with his family. And it's one of those things, when you travel that distance, to be able to connect with family and to run into each other in such vast lands, it's pretty amazing. I mean, it's amazing now when we run into people that we know from church at the supermarket. Oh, hey, how's it going? Blah, 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 blah. Nice to see you here. But I mean, I've never seen you, I've never met you, but we really are family. And so that's what happened. They saw each other and they greeted each other, and it was a great time for family reunion. I thought it was also interesting that in verse 11, Jacob came over and just kissed Rachel out of the blue and then started weeping out loud. And then he explained to Rachel what was going on, and she ran and told her father, "Dad, someone kissed me." I don't know if that's what she said, but the reality was, Jacob kissed her right off the bat. I don't know if that works too well in this day and age. But, they had a good time. They had a good family reunion, and he worked for his uncle. Laban had 2 daughters. The older daughter was named Leah. Younger was Rachel. There was no sparkle in Leah's eyes, but Rachel had a beautiful figure and a lovely face. So, sad to say, Leah did not have a sparkle in her eye. That's a few way of saying she's not pretty. And I don't know what pretty was back then. She could be pretty into our standards now. Back then, they liked women who were more voluptuous, larger in figure. Today, that's not something that we consider beautiful, except now at Target you see models that are not exactly thin anymore. So I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder and the person who's living it out, which is fine. But I'm just saying in this time, it was interesting that he looked upon Rachel and not Leah. And he said flat out, I don't like her or not flat out, but she wasn't pretty in his eyes. And he was interested in the pretty one. I'll work for 7 years. Give me Rachel. And he agreed. So Jacob worked, but his love was so strong that it seemed like, it was only a few days. Finally came to the time for him to fulfill his promise. And so Jacob said to Laban in verse 21, "Now give me my wife so I can sleep with her." My friends, this is not the way to go for someone. That's not the reason why you get married either. And, as we see here, that's what he wanted. That's what he said. So Laban made a wedding, had everything done, but he did a bait and switch, gave him Leah instead, and Leah had 4 sons. Now, it was an honor to be able to have children, but then to have sons, to carry on the family, to have a legacy be kept on. And we see Leah's situation, kind of sad. She was ignored. She was not ignored, she was pushed to the side. And see, here's the thing, too. Jacob wasn't very nice in the sense that, even though he loved Rachel, he stayed with Leah. And he slept with her. And not just once, but a few times enough to have 4 sons. And at the same time, he loved Rachel. Now, I don't know about you guys. I think this is a powder keg. It's going to blow up somehow. If it was our generation now, 2 wives, not only that, sisters within the same cities or the same household with one husband who clearly loved one more than others. That's problematic. That's problematic. And, the question and the thing I wanted to bring back is, sometimes our actions yield results that we never originally wanted. You see, I kind of wonder if, this is according to God's plan, so I don't want to jump into any conclusions. But as we see, when you do something and you cheated someone else out, someone cheats you out, you get what you deserve in a sense where you learn your own lesson. But then to continue on with this, we see that, the situation doesn't get too much better. And that's something that we see too that gives us hope in the sense that God chose Jacob. God chose that family line to be the blessing to a whole world. Jesus comes from the family line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Gives us hope that a moron like Jacob, I know he's a forefather and he's in the lineage of Jesus Christ, but the reality of the human side of Jacob is so corrupt. It gives me hope that within my corruption, God can use me. Within your corruption, God can use you. And with our, with our failures and mistakes, it's not us who changes the course of history. Jacob didn't know that he's going to affect me, Pastor Peter, who is associate pastor of this church here, a couple thousand years down the road. But yet God used him in his hands. God chooses to use who he uses. But the reality is only through God. You see, when we try to do things in our own strength, when we try to make things work out, at times things work out. But to really see the ramifications or the consequences or the benefits that we get out of our actions, we don't know what's going to happen. We just have to trust that God will do his thing. If we're faithful to him, if we're humble enough, if we allow him to use us as a tool in his hands, with our corruption and everything else too, he can do great things. And so with that, my friends, I wanted to encourage you to trust in God, to do great things, not because you do great things, but because he does it through you. And because he loves you, so love him back. We have to be like that centurion who trusted Jesus and was willing to bow down to a Jewish man, which was totally opposite of what a Roman soldier, a centurion, would do, to know his place and to have faith that Jesus can do amazing things because of our love and compassion towards others. So, my friends, dig deep. Ask God to use you, because that's so much better and leaves a better legacy. Even in the midst of our failures, he can use us if we're willing. Take care, everyone. We'll see you in the next one.